So I'm really happy today to have here with us Geert. So let me introduce a little bit to Geert. So actually, I met Geert when I was in Manila, Philippines. Geert is Dutch, but he lives in Sweden, and we met in Manila. So basically, as you will see, Geert has been working, and he embraces. He's a multicultural person. I would say he has been working across Asia, Middle East, Europe, and all these countries. The topic that is dear to his heart definitely is creativity. He has founded a Center for Organizational Creativity based in Stockholm, and he has worked around this topic, but also innovation across different industries, in public institutions, civil society. He is involved in consortium, which is making happen facilitation of cross-sector collaboration among basically European Union agencies, which is a tough job because we know how difficult are and what are the bureaucracies in European Union basically departments. And he's helping them to find new creative ways to innovate, basically. His philosophy, which is very interesting, is that innovation is the engine that propels an organization to success, but creativity basically is a torque that gives momentum and acceleration. Saying that, Geert will talk about creativity as the fuel and spark for the innovation engine. We talk a lot about innovation. GIMI has its own innovation, basically methodology and approach, and we would like to understand where creativity fits into that puzzle, basically. So Geert, the floor is yours. Hopefully I made a decent introduction of you, but feel free to add more.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you are. Fantastic introduction. I don't need to say much more. Well, I can talk a bit about what I've lived in the US. This is in the late 90s. I lived in the US for a while, and then in '99, actually, I moved to Singapore and stayed there for close to 16 years. So I'm now about 10 years in Stockholm, Sweden. Still a big passion for Asia, and still doing some work in Asia as well. Today, as Elila already explained, I want to talk about innovation, but that aspect of the creative side of innovation, and how creativity is both the fuel and the spark for innovation. And there's, of course, a multi-dimensional perspective to that. So I would like to take you through some slides that helps us understand a bit more about creativity. And then specifically, I want to take you in that whole space of organizational creativity. I actually want to take you to that aspect of individual creativity and the meta skills that help people in developing their creative capacity for themselves, and as such become better creative performers in the innovation machinery in that sense. So let me just start sharing my screen, and then we get going. There you go. I hope you could all see.
Yes, we do.
And let's start with a beautiful snapshot of Stockholm in wintertime. So that's currently what we are facing, although today's picture looks a bit more gray and less beautiful white on the water, because it's plus degrees suddenly. How amazing how fast that comes. So I'm the founder and partner in the Center for Organizational Creativity, which I've co-founded together with Pernille Johansson, who works for Volvo, not Volvo Cars, but Volvo Group. the Center for Organizational Creativity, as I already said before, is really working on that whole aspect of creativity in the domain of innovation. So organizational creativity, what do we really mean with organizational creativity? As we already said in the introduction, we feel that it's actually both the fuel and the spark that drives the innovation engine forward. Organizational creativity is well appreciated and getting more and more attention as well. And research shows that creativity is widely recognized as a valuable and important trait in the eyes of many CEOs. However, a lot of them are actually still a bit in the dark on how they can make this an organizational-wide shared capacity, how they can make it a core competence for innovation, right? Because yeah, you see it in the yearbooks, creativity is very important. And CEOs like to talk in the annual reports about innovation and creativity, but how do you really go about it, right? How can organizations embed creativity as a core competence for innovation? Now that's the question that we're gonna be focusing on. And in the center, we look at the organizational creative capacity from these three, actually four, if you include leadership in there. But today, we're going to look at these three foundational elements of organizational creativity. So let's look at, and let me just name them all first before I jump into creative climate. But so there's creative climate, which has everything to do with establishing the right atmosphere, conducive atmosphere for creativity. Then there's the organization's creative operations, right, which has everything to do with how ideas move through the value chain. And then there's people's creative capacity, capability that I talked about earlier, which has everything to do with our own skills of creative thinking and how you can drive creative thinking for yourself. So let's look at conducive creative capacity then. When we think about, when most people think about a creative climate, then they think about the environment. They think about how the organization look. We need to be more creative. So let's start with an office that looks a bit like Google, right? That's fantastic, of course. But a conducive climate for creativity is more than beanbags or barista coffee corners, right? It also has that whole aspect of the social element. The social element also affects the climate in an organization. How do you interact with each other, right? So there's that whole aspect of to create a conducive climate, you need to work on a more diverse group of people that come together, right? Creativity depends on diverse viewpoints. So if you talk about diversity in organization, often people talk about diversity in the terms of race, gender, etc. But diversity is also cognitive diversity, and cognitive diversity is an important aspect of innovation and creativity. But if you have a diverse group of people, then you get also a certain friction, and that's good. You get a certain abrasion. And that has to be there, but you need to manage that as well in order for the climate to be very conducive to creativity. So how do you manage those interactions between people, and how can you turn friction into a creative friction? And then from there, you need to work on the interdependence of the people together as well. That's another important aspect of the social dimension of creative climate. And then there's the psychological perspective there as well. The psychological perspective has also to do with self-directiveness. How can you actually start taking initiative without needing to be continuously getting directions from other people, right? That's very important. But if you work with other people, how can you actually then exchange ideas in an environment that feels safe for you, that you don't feel threatened about people completely pushing you in corners when you come up with new ideas or criticizing it? Those aspects are very, very important as well. Then the aspect of creative operations. So creative operations is all about systemizing and structuring the operations that, and this has a lot to do with innovation. It overlaps with the process of innovation. However, the process of innovation is much larger and much longer in that sense. But if you want to look at it kind of like this is the front end of innovation, then we think about creative operations in identifying the opportunities, right? And how we can operationalize opportunities. That is an aspect where you look at insights and ideas and new aspects of innovation for the organization, right? It's all about the idea value chain, right? How can you actually move ideas through the various steps and stages of the idea value chain, from idea generation to pushing it forward to managing these ideas, selection of ideas, implementation, etc., etc. Systemization has all to do with the fact that if you want to have creative operations, it needs to be systemized in a certain way as well. So it shouldn't be a random activity. And within that systemization, you give people all the freedom to be creative, of course. And then there's the aspect of the creative playbook. And that has all to do with something, a guiding document that keeps you, in that sense, all at the same page and helps you people understand the aspects of organizational creativity. So having ideas is hardly ever the problem, but having a structured and systematic approach to it, that's often where the challenge is in organizations at this moment. And that's why organizing this kind of, the aspect of creative operations is very important. So the third pillar is all about the creative capability building the right mindset, building the skills. Now, this is what I would like to talk to you about today, and because I think this is an aspect that often doesn't get the attention, right? So what is it about the creative? How do you learn creativity? Isn't that something that you already are born with, or those kind of aspects? And that's not true, of course. Creativity is a skill, it's a competence that can be developed and can be built up. I need to move these somewhere to the bottom or something, because it's kind of like hindering my, let me just minimize it here. Sorry about that. Yeah. So creative capabilities development is what we're going to talk about. And the World Economic Forum envisions that in the year 27, creative thinking, including flexibility and curiosity, will be the top skills for organizations to work with. We have a very monolithical, a very square kind of view of what creativity is, right? We think of creativity in a very simplistic form. But creativity actually is much more multifaceted. It's crystallized in many aspects. And as you see in that circle, creativity has a lot to do with openness. It has to do with how you focus. And it has to do with how you motivate and drive yourself towards innovation. And this is based on new insights in neuroscience that, you know, in the olden days we used to talk about, oh, creativity is all about you're a right brain thinker, and if you are a right brain thinker, you're a creative person. If you are a left brain thinker, you're more logical. Neuroscience finds out that it's actually networks coming together, and these networks are completely interlinked. Like you see this beautiful world map of airline routes being highly interconnected, except that in the human brain, this is like 1 billion times more connections than, or 1 trillion times more connections than what you see on this beautiful picture. So these networks that are interconnected, one of them is called the default mode network. That's initially discovered by the fact when they were doing research on focus, they saw how people focus. They saw actually that when people were not focusing on a specific activity, they saw some areas of the brain actually light up. And they discovered that if you actually are unfocusing yourself, the default mode, sometimes called the imaginative network mode, is popping up. The default mode network is what drives our creative juices. It's what drives our imagination. And within the skills that you then develop, we look at explorative thinking as well as intuitive thinking are driven by this network. The central executive network, that's the focus network. There we talk about reasoning. And you may say, like, reasoning and organizing, those are not things that you really do in creativity, but in a holistic perspective of creativity, and with the knowledge that these networks are continuously working together, you will actually find out later on in the presentation that these are important aspects of creativity. And last is the salience network. The salience network has a lot to do in actually connecting the central executive network with the default mode network. So it's kind of like an intermediate network connecting and allowing them to communicate, but also the salience network is responsible for aspects of your inner drive, so your motivation. So how we exchange ideas with other people, but also how we activate and actualize ourselves towards our creativity. So let's look at these 6 modes, these 6 thinking modes that are important for creative thinking, and go through them one by one. Of course, going through them, you could actually have a whole morning to talk about each of these. So to do this in half an hour, that's a bit of a challenge. So it will be a very condensed and a very accelerated version to share with you. But nonetheless, I think there's some nice insightful things to take out of this today. So let's look at the first one. Let's look at the explorer. How do you wake the explorer in yourself? What do you work on? What are the meta skills that are behind that? What can you develop? That's what we're going to talk about. But exploring, let's actually just look at first, like, when exploring, right? Like, when do you get into that exploration mode? And every creative effort that you actually work on is full of challenges. It's full of walls and dead ends. It's full of detours and U-turns, right? So there's a lot of frustration, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears going on. You know, your team is stuck in a thinking loop, or your boss is not happy with the quality of your ideas. Your organization is dealing with an extremely difficult problem. You're in need of a different perspective, and you're looking at finding more answers than just one to a specific problem, right? So why exploration? Well, exploration opens the mind. It actually helps you expand your field of possibilities. And normally we narrow our field of possibilities. To get around in life, you don't want to have too many fields of possibilities. You drive a car with not too many fields of possibilities. You focus, and and why is that? Because we work actually with mental models, and mental models help us to get around in life. Here's a small little quiz. If I would ask you, these 2 figures, each of them has a name. One is called Kiki, and the other one is called Bubba. Now, if I would ask you which one is called Kiki and which one is called Bubba, then, you know, like you can fill it in, but I'm sure that most of you would see the star form as Kiki and the more organic form as Bubba. And why is that? That's because our mental models help us think about the world in such a way. It helps us get around and understand the world and get around in life, right? Mental models are deeply held images in our mind in how the world works, and language, or seeing certain images like what you just showed you, we immediately have a certain mental model of what should be or what is, right? And the mental models are great. We need them in many aspects of life. But for creative exploration, they may hinder you a bit. And that is simply because of the fact that we go around making meaning of all aspects of life, and we fill in the blanks. And that kind of, like, as I said, helps us a lot, but it doesn't help us so much in the creative work. In the 40s, I think it was 45 or something, a guy called Carl Dunker did an experiment with, he had a big cork panel on like a post-it panel made of cork on the wall, and asked people to put the candle, attach the candle to this cork wall, lit the candle, but make sure that the wax is not dripping down on the table. And people had a lot of problems with that, because how do you can maybe put the thumbtack through the how do you call that, the fuse or something, but how would you then light it? So a lot of people had troubles in finding a solution to this. This is because their mental model actually limited them to see the box as something that could help them out in solving this problem. The box where the thumbtacks are in is just seen as a container for the thumbtacks, right? So you get a certain functional fixedness. But as soon as you get the idea of, like, you can actually go beyond, you can use all the materials, and the thumbtack is not only to just try to attach the candle to the wall, then you become more creative. So letting go of these mental models, or suspending them, if you like, is very important in creativity. So by developing the following meta skills, you can become better at going around these rigid mental models that hold us back. So here's 4 meta skills that I would like to take you through. Curiosity, it's all about opening up. It's all about having a beginner's mind. Creative perception is all about looking at, when you look at things in a different way, then things start looking differently as well. Deviating from the beaten track, how can you actually move away from the path that you're always on and the solutions that you always come up with? And active imagination, you know, that aspect of, like, how can you actually conceptualize using your imagination or those aspects. So let's look at creative perception today. And creative perception, changing the way you look at things, and the things will change by themselves, is at the core of creative perception. So you ask people how many squares you see here, they will immediately start counting, and they will say 16, right? That's the mental model that kind of like keeps you within that box. Some people may say, well, it's the overall box is also a square. And that's indeed how you need to start looking at things. You need to start looking from a different perspective. You need to start changing your view. And then you will say, like, this is also a square, right? And you have 4 of those. There's a square in the middle as well. And there's a square that up north, south, east, west will also form a cross of squares. There's one big one here, and that gives you 4, and then there's the overall square. So by looking at things differently, suddenly you expand your field of possibilities. You suddenly have a lot more squares than you initially thought of. Intuition, how do you awake the intuitive in you? Let's unpack creative intuition a bit here as well. So what is it? How does it work? And can you train it, right? For a lot of people, creative intuition is something that is kind of like, it's a bit, mystic. And some people attach a creative or a more mystic aspect to it. But let's just find out from a very rational point of view what intuition is and how it works, right? Knowing without knowing how you know it is a beautiful explanation of intuition, in my opinion. And where does this come from? Well, intuition is actually just purely the functioning of your unconscious that is at work all the time, even when you sleep. It's 24/7 on. It just never stops, right? Your conscious will slow down or sleep or rest, but the unconscious is always working. That's where intuition actually works, and the unconscious is huge. It's a massive storehouse of information across your whole life is stored in there. Now, this picture is perhaps a bit dated, and this is how we used to see how the brain works. A lot of drawers where information is stored in, but actually it's hyper-connected, and it looks more like this, right? So the size of it is amazing, and the connections are amazing. Some people say 86 billion, other people talk about over 100 billion, billion neurons, and a total connections of about 100 trillion connections made by these neurons. The speed of how it works is amazing. You know, like if you look at baseball, where a ball is thrown and goes at 160 miles per hour or something at the one who holds the bat, you can't really in your conscious mind see that ball coming to you. Still, they can hit the ball, right? It's the unconscious that actually. So it's almost a direct connection between the eyes and the unconscious that makes you hit the ball at the right time. The speed is enormously fast. Then look at the size. If just a small question here, if you would look at the conscious brain and you would say that the conscious brain would have the size of, let's say, a square meter of the toilet in your house, for example, right? Like, how would you guess the size of the unconscious brain would be? A lot of people say like, oh, wow, the conscious is like the toilet, and maybe the unconscious is like the whole house or something like that. But it's 200,000 times bigger, which means that if the unconscious is like the toilet in the house, the conscious, then the unconscious is like 40 football fields combined together. So it's an enormous size. This I always find astonishing, the length of all the connections. So if you look at all these neural connections and you would place them, if you would be able to actually place them in a length, you would actually get to the moon and halfway back. And this is for one person's neural connections. So the connectivity and the enormous processing power is just fantastic, right? Is the working of the unconscious, the intuition, as the intuition power, is that the same as insight? Intuition and insight is not completely the same. Intuition is something that communicates in images or communicates in feelings and gives you certain knowledge and a certain conclusion. You arrive at a conclusion and you don't know how you arrive at the conclusion. By working with the intuitive mind and by working with the explorative mind together, and also by working with reasoning around these two, creative reasoning, you actually develop the aha moment. So the combination of intuitive thinking, explorative thinking, and creative reasoning, that will give you that aha moment that happens to, for example, what you look at here, Sir William Robert Hamilton, who in a flash of genius discovered the fundamental formula for quaternion multiplications. Don't ask me what it is, but I think it's a fantastic story. He was in Dublin walking alongside the river, suddenly got that aha moment. Of course, he's been working on it for years, so his knowledge about the subject is enormously rich, and probably knew already intuitively where this answer would be found, but suddenly he connects the dots and the aha moment comes into play, and he had to remind it, so he wrote it on the bridge wall, and they later on commemorized it with this beautiful sign here. Can you train intuition? Well, the answer actually is no, you can't, but you can set the stage for it. right? So training is not intuition is not a skill that you can train, but you can actually, it's not even a muscle. It's there. It's enormously powerful, but you need to open up for it. You need to get into it. So what you do is you can dial down aspects of negative programming. Often we don't trust our own hunches or our own gut feels. We were saying like, oh no, that's probably not it, right? So we get in doubt when we get these kind of insights. We have an intolerance of uncertainty. We want predictability a lot of times. So that also needs to be dialed down if you want to be more intuitive. And I like this word psychosclerosis, meaning that we are continuously very much sticking to very rigid ways of doing things, empirical logic, rules, standardized procedures. But what you need to do is actually dial up some other aspects, right? In organizations, but also for yourself. Dial up that aspect of exploration. Dial up curiosity, flexibility. Playfulness is very important. Informality, humor, wittiness. And you have to encourage it. As a leader, you should actually encourage intuition and even provide room for it, right, in the organization. Tolerate intuitive input at any stage in the creative process. And here's one such leader is Branson, who says that there's some things that can't be summed up in a statistic. This is when you need to use a bit of intuition. When we lose such touch of an intuition, then we naturally become more risk averse and conservative. Now let's look at that reasoning part. And you may say like, hey, wait a minute, reasoning? You know, like, what does that have to do? What does rationality has to do with creativity? And indeed, you know, on first sight, you see them as polar forces, right? You see them as black and white opposing each other. Rationality and creativity, those are two completely different fields. But it's actually instrumental. Reasoning is actually instrumental to any aspect of the creative process, not only where they say like, oh, you know, there's this whole aspect of divergent thinking and then convergent thinking, and convergent thinking is actually where you start focusing on evaluation of your idea and then you select your idea. Absolutely, that's very, very important. But creative reasoning goes into the divergent stage as well. It's across the whole aspect of creativity. So we see rationality as very linear. We see creativity as being all over the place, very holistic, very chaotic, perhaps. And we should see creativity as going to all corners and making all these U-turns and trying out new angles and new perspectives. So it cannot be a linear line. It has to be a non-linear way of thinking. But there's a very nice way of looking how reasoning actually fits in this whole chaos, because you can actually fit reasoning in here. This is how you do that. You cannot move yourself from one side of the room to the other side of the room just by being on the other side. You need to make steps. And in creative work, we make these step-by-step phases as well. We think about something, we step back, we reason about it. We think, how can this otherwise be looking? How can we otherwise be looking at this? How is this going forward? So and then you meet a dead end, you go back again, and you make a U-turn. All of this aspect is a combination of exploration and reasoning at the same time. Artists do this, scientists do this, but also business people do this without knowing it, right? An artist looks at a painting, steps back, squeezes the eyes a bit and reasons about like, what did I just do on there and how can this further evolve? How can I further work on this? A choreographer looks in the mirror, a choreographer is creating a dance, looks in the mirror, is correcting, is trying new moves out. So there's continuously exploration, intuition and reasoning at work. So it's a dance between these three forces, these three thinking modes. So rather than asking yourself, how creative am I? It is actually much more interesting to ask yourself, how am I creative? Because we are all creative, but we're differently creative. Some people may be applying a bit more rationality and logic and reasoning. Others are a bit more intuitive, but we are all creative in different ways, but all creative. How does it work? Well, it actually, creative reasoning applies both concrete and abstract thinking at the same time. It's analytical, it's synthetic, which means it combines concepts together, and it's connecting the dots. It's conceptual. It's looking freely at various aspects of the development, and at the same time, it's evaluative, not only at the end but across the process. Now, the meta skills behind these other skills are actually that you need to slow down and reflect. So this is what Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow so nicely talked about, that you need to slow down, right? And he's right, we think too fast. And this is what Kahneman writes in his book. A bat and a ball cost 100. He used different, he talked about $1.10, I believe. Putting it in the modern time, about a bat and a ball together cost 110 euros. The bat costs 100 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Because we think too fast, we say 10 euros, right? But that's not true. It's actually 5 euros, right? When the bat costs 105 and the ball costs 5, together they will cost 110. So the funny part is that Kahneman talks about that he calls it system one, fast thinking is system one. And he in various occasions talk about this is your intuition, your intuitive mind. And I think that's wrong, actually. I think it's our conscious mind going on autopilot. It's not our intuitive mind making this mistake. The same thing here. If it takes 5 machines, 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take for 100 machines to take 100 widgets? We would say 100 minutes, but it's still 5 minutes, right? It's our autopilot jumping to conclusions or confusions in that sense. So slow your thinking down and take time to reflect. And one of that aspect of slowing down and reflecting is also to become aware of assumptions, because assumptions are often the mother of all evil, right? We need them again, but they help us also getting back into our mental models, because we often base these assumptions on the mental models that we have shaped of the world, right? We accept things as true, even without proof. Right? A Volvo is a safe car, right? Because we've been conditioned to think that they are safe cars, but maybe still true, but how much safer are they than other cars? Maybe all cars are quite safe nowadays or not. They come to us automatically, these assumptions, and they're based on the mental models, as I just said. So they guide our behavior and they help us make decisions. Now, here's another beautiful exercise that probably also all of you may have seen this one. It's a very popular one. This is often presented as a creative exercise. It's a thinking out of the box exercise. And only the creative people who think out of the box, they can solve this. I disagree with this, actually. I'll give you the solution directly. You know, this is but the question actually is like the quiz is how to connect these 9 dots, these 9 light bulbs here with a pencil over the paper without going away from the paper. So you keep the pen on the paper and you do 4 straight lines to connect them all, right? And they have to be straight lines. Now the answer is like that. And then you go outside the box 2 times and you connect them all 4. But I can tell you that it's hardly possible to do this only on creative thinking. In fact, here is where the mind has to step back, like the artist that we just talked about, and reflect on like, perhaps even verbalize and visualize, what do we have here? Like what's expected here? How can I solve this? And you slow down and you reflect on the various possibilities that could be there. And only then you can come to this conclusion. There's people that reflect further and saying like, hey, you can connect them actually by 3 lines, and you go all the way up with a very long line way out of the paper, and then you come back slightly diagonal, and you get the second row completely covered, and then you go up again, right? Or somebody may say like, hey, you know, you draw one line, you put this on a tin can and draw one line around the tin can, and then you have them covered all. That's when people get creative, I think, once you know the answer. So the organizing aspect of creativity. And again, like with reasoning, we talk about organizing, you know, like isn't it all about chaos and letting your creativity flow free, you know, creative flow, as Csikszentmihalyi talks about in his book Creative Flow. So structure and discipline, are they just blocking creative flow? Isn't it a big dam that gets into the way of your creative flow? But to look at it as a big dam that gets in the way, that's the wrong way to look at it. You have to look at structure not as an obstacle. You have to actually look at it as a riverbed, perhaps, where the water can flow freely, but the riverbed provides a specific structure to allow the flow to move forward, right? Let's look at 3 meta skills that can help you move your creative work forward in a very organized way. One I like to call simplex thinking. This is where complexity and simplicity meet. Simplex thinking is let's talk by talking about complex thinking. Complexity is we're very connected to and we desire complexity in life. So complexity is very important for human beings. And if you look at Maslow's pyramid, it would be very high on the pyramid. The more higher you get, the more complexity is welcomed and embraced. But at the same time, complexity can grow over the top a bit as well. So as soon as complexity increases, we like that, and we see more value added to ideas that are more complex. But you drive it too far, then complex actually becomes complicated. Then the value goes down again. So to work on ideas, you need to and to work on products as well. Simplicity in design is very important as well. So you need to find that sweet spot between simplicity and complexity, right? Simplexity point. Focused thinking is...
Geert, sorry for
Yes.
interrupting, but sorry for interrupting this very compelling presentation, but just try to wrap up so we can have a little bit of space for the Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, obviously, it's such a massive subject that it's indeed hard to do it in a few minutes. But let's just race you through a bit. Can I have 5 more minutes and do a fast racing thing then?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So focused thinking. Try to write down single tasking just like this. In a very long line, you would not have any problems. If you would write down multitasking like this, where you write first an M and below a 1, then a U, and then a 2, you completely lose it, right? This is not keeping your focus on one aspect, so it becomes very confusing. Structured thinking. Here's an example of Mariam Mirzakhani, an Iranian scientist and mathematician who uses visual thinking to structure her thinking, and she's very creative, or was very creative. She passed away sadly. And take a quick print screen of this picture and try to solve it at home. This is perhaps not a creative exercise, but in this quiz, you look at identifying the cards that are behind these, or the jack, the queen, and the diamond, the king, behind these cards. You would never be able to solve this with just the information provided there. So visual thinking is helping you in solving this problem. And by all means, try to solve this later on at home yourself. I think we just let me quickly. The last one I take you through is the exchanger, and then we get into the Q&A, and the actualizer we do that for another time. So the exchanger has all to do with how you communicate with other people, but also to do with the inner workings of your communication. So my question often is, everybody's question is, how good am I in communicating with others, right? But we have always quite positive perception of our own communications. The more challenging question is, how good are you in thinking with others? That's where it gets more, and specifically with thinking with people who think different than you. In creative exchange, in working with other people, we often take a reactive orientation rather than a creative orientation, and we need to work towards a creative orientation. But reactive is absolutely more easy. We think in what should be, right, rather than what can be. And let me just show you the 4 ways of creative exchange, or the 4 ways of exchange or communication. People tend in creative exchange, they tend to be either conformative or confrontative. Meaning conforming means like, oh, you want to fit in, you want to seek consensus. In this experiment, they've actually tested people how they would confirm when you have a table of people saying like, oh, the task is to find out the same length in exhibit A. What is the same length in exhibit B? We can all see that it's number 3. But if you have a whole table of people saying like, it's number 2, the guy in the middle obviously is the test subject, and he's looking for like, I'm seeing it differently. But a lot of people then actually, okay, they go with the flow, they go with the people, and they consent, right? So conforming is something that goes against creativity, but so is a very confrontative and hostile attitude as well, right? A lot of people are like, they have a lot of buts, it's not possible, it's too expensive, let's get realistic, or that's not how we do it here, management won't agree. Those kind of things are not constructive, right? So how can you actually move out of these 2 aspects of conformative and confronting others on a continuous basis with negative energy to something that actually is more creative, right? And that's that aspect of what are the meta skills behind creative thinking? And I sum them up quickly, and then we go into the Q&A. So Mandela has a beautiful way of communicating, or had a beautiful way of communicating with people. So I called it Mandela's meta skills for creative exchange. And that's enormous capacity for strong listening and speaking last only, right? Listening, suspending your judgment on what you hear, perspecting, taking the perspective, or better, getting perspective and asking people what their perspective is, then reflecting on what you hear, and only then you voice your opinion, your perspective at the end. So with that, let me just jump to the last slide and give you a thank you. And perhaps ask you to take a quick QR shot of this and connect on LinkedIn.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Geert. If you can stop sharing the screen,
yes,
so we see each other. Great. Thank you very much for this lovely presentation. I think we learned a lot, and I would love to have a masterclass even more on this individual creativity. You guided us a lot on that. Now we have 10 minutes of questions, so I'll go fast, maybe break the ice with a question. You showed in the beginning like a model about organizational creativity. I know you are an expert on that, and you have basically guided many organizations, right? Shift into a more creative type of culture. Actually, recently we are working with some more traditional industries and type of companies like banking, insurance, and all this type of companies. And even though like leadership is trying to basically push on business creativity and all this, it feels that being risk-averse type of culture, type of companies, it's not very easy for them to be more creative or to push creativity and make that part of their culture, right? Can you tell us an example shortly how you have helped or guided an organization in a traditional sort of industry, traditional sort of mindset, shift into a more creative? So what were the pieces of the puzzle that needed to be in place to drive them into a more creative culture?
Oh, okay. Well, a nice example is in bureaucracy, where people are also are expected in many aspects to be risk avoidance and to be working according to structures and ways of doing things, because there's a certain as a bureaucracy you have or in most bureaucracies in the world, you have a certain accountability to the people of a country, right, or the people of a city. So bureaucracy has always been expected to be working within the lines of how to do things and avoid risks. But bureaucracies are also finding out that innovation is becoming more and more important. So you need to change the mindset of the people, the civil servants in that sense, to become more creative and to risk avoidance is a beautiful word, but to help them then start taking calculated risks, right? That they at least take more risk and think about it. So I've developed a program that the Singapore government currently is running with civil servants in how to think more creative in teams and how to actually let go of these aspects of hanging on to certain. So it starts with training, and it starts with making people aware that there isn't a possibility of transformation and innovation, while not letting go completely of the accountability that you have towards the people that you work for.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll leave it to Itendra. He has a question. I know he has to leave, and then we have another 2 questions in the line.
Thank you. Good to see you again. It's been a while, a couple of months. We saw you in Philippines. So wonderful to see you again. Great presentation. A great presentation. I want to be provocative, and there's a hope that we can improve everybody's innovation or creativity by teaching them this type of frameworks and saying you can do more. You go explore, go be curious, and all the things. And the whole idea is to do that. But in the pressure of the organizations we work with now, Fortune 500 companies, the pressure is we need the results also now. And so people need to change. And there's a thing called the brain being malleable or at some point kind of frozen with fixed mindset, growth mindset type of conversations. And is it, what's your suggestion? Recruit correctly up front for the criteria that you're providing, saying, look out for these characteristics and recruit for that so that they can be trained much better? Or is it that we can take everybody and increase their creativity? Because what my experience is, under pressure, under short-term pressure and bosses' pressure, people revert back to what they feel most comfortable. And if they feel comfortable being very rational and they feel comfortable taking no risk, they revert back to that. And therefore, how do you drive a culture of creativity and innovation when under pressure, they revert back to what they do best? Malleable brain, fixed brain. Children are malleable, adults are not as malleable.
Yeah, it's a very valid point, of course, and everything that gets into the way of creativity and innovation is firefighting on a daily basis, and all these things that you have to do. So you mentioned the word culture, and I think that's where you have to change in that aspect. You have to change the culture of the organization first, so that you give room to there is this whole aspect of, the explorative side of an organization and the exploitative side of an organization. The organization needs to make business. We need to have these deliverables. This needs to move forward, etc., etc. But at the same time, you need to think of new ideas. So Hitendra, in that aspect, people will always, if they are creatively trained or creatively highly capable or not, they will always be firefighting in organizations that are continuously running and running and running, right? So the aspect that both of these things need to be able to happen at the same time. The business needs to deliver, but at the same time, you need to create these pockets of innovation or these pockets of creativity and create room for people. Spend a lot of times in wasteless meetings, like horrible meetings. They could spend that time, a lot of times, they could spend much of their time in being creative as well. So, and that aspect of hiring or even firing around that, I think that culture can be created. You don't need to hire creative people. Everybody has a creative capacity and a lot of times a lot of knowledge about the business that can be put at work.
Hitendra, are you on mute?
Yeah, thank you, Geert. Great answer. I'll let Wanda do the next question, and Geert, I'll talk to you very soon.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely.
You answered the question I was going to ask the exact question around recruitment, but I guess after thinking about your answer, is there a situation though where people tend to also judge you coming into an organization based on your past experience, your positions? So there might be someone that you could potentially recruit for that right now is actually developing their creativity, not within their profession, right? They might be doing something on the side. A lot of times people tap into that because they aren't necessarily, like you said, getting it satisfied within the organization. So even though, yes, everyone can be built to be creative, wouldn't you want to sort of find some way to tap into figuring out, like you said, where those people who have that natural instinct and acceleration for that? I'm just trying to figure out, is there a balance between having that innate skill there to help accelerate those who are also building it?
I'm not sure if I got the question correctly, but if your question was like, shouldn't you be hiring a bit like what Hitendra just said for people that come already with a package of creative power, or
at least assessing that, maybe, because again, you might identify someone who has an innate way of thinking that
you don't identify
in the organization, it might accelerate the rest.
Yeah, no, I mean, there can be a lot of people that can become advocates, and a lot of people can become a role model, and leadership has a great role to play here as well in accepting or not accepting, but motivating a creative behavior and encouraging and rewarding it. For those people that you talk about, those people that have an innate creativity already in them. Again, like we all have that actually. It's just that we kind of like we've frozen it, and it's a matter of letting that unleashing that creativity again. So it's a lot of people are like, but this is not how I should react to this problem. But they, as soon as you liberate them and allow them to be free on their creative work, then you will see that everybody has innate creative power and will actually be good to apply it as well.
Thank you.
Geert, since we are basically at 10 o'clock and I don't want to keep people over time, but just to end this, and then we can stay a little bit basically after this time to talk more informally if others have questions. But what's the last takeaway basically that you would like to share with us regarding creativity? What are the last words?
Well, the last words, I hope it's not my last words, but just do it. You know, just allow yourself to be creative. And another aspect is that it's not how creative you are, but it's how you are creative. And I think that's an important takeaway. Everybody is creative, except we're all creative in different ways.
Great. Thank you very much, Geert.